It had been several decades since enormous works were begun, excavating deep into the earth, constructing underground holes and tunnels which would become known as the system. Here, people could find shelter during the impending period of meteor strikes assailing Earth. Many years prior to this, observations and calculations had been made regarding a dangerous belt of photons emanating from the distant star group Pleiades, known as the Rings of Alcyone, and the pathway our solar system takes as it revolves around this star cluster. Our solar system orbits across the Rings of Alcyone twice every 26,000 years, and what became known as the Great Crossing occurs every fifth cycle, when our solar system travels a 2,000-year journey through the asteroid-congested photon belt. And thus, it was realized the Great Crossing was approaching, and they had little time to prepare. Existing craters on Earth were well considered. Timescales were calculated, as were possible scenarios. There was much work to be done, and so little time. It was apparent that whatever was living on the Earth's surface was likely to perish. 2,000 years of meteor bombardment would alter everything. Of the existing craters, the largest was 500 meters deep, with a diameter of 32 kilometers. The only safe haven must be deep underground, deeper than meteors could penetrate. Huge tunnels and shafts of varying designs and inclinations were dug deep into the rock. At certain intervals, great cavernous areas were carved out and reinforced. Every consideration was given to making these caverns suitable for residency and survival. Each was prepared with food and water, medical supplies, and machine shops. At depths reaching up to 3 kilometers, an entire excavation system, similar to an ant colony, continued to expand. Phosphorescent rocks and fungi illuminated the subterranean food gardens, tunnels, and galleries. Many thousands were already permanently living and working underground. One day, an evident change in the weather could be felt. An unusual sensation. Brightness and darkness together in one place. Although the sun was shining brightly, suddenly, total silence was all-pervading. As a vibrating electric tingling passed through the body, all appeared to be brighter than usual. Yet the suspended tingling silence remained. Without warning, the sky exploded as a colossal meteor tore through the atmosphere. And slammed into the Earth with horrifying force. It was really happening. Those who had criticized the system's underground projects as paranoid folly were abruptly shaken into a new reality. Everyone scrambled for the tunnels. Chaos was everywhere. Mass panic broke out in the struggle to get in. Not everyone would. The entire system could only cater for 0.05% of the population. There were many years of isolation planned ahead, with limited supplies for a multiplying subterranean population. 37 hours after the initial impact, the second meteor struck, this time with 3 smaller meteors ensuing. The destruction was catastrophic. The human death toll in the millions. Those who were a great distance from the subterranean entrances had little or no chance of reaching safety. The panic quickly propelled into extreme violence. Murders took place as people tried to get underground. Babies howling, people screaming. The military simply killed those out of control. It was a time of great relief to be amongst the select few who would gain access. Horrifying and desperate for those left out. Although immense stores of knowledge, machinery, and assorted essentials were already located well underground, many necessities had not yet been transported. Now, there would be no chance. The underground systems quickly reached capacity. Mayhem erupted as the great doors began to close. A wave of screaming, pleading, desperate flesh thrashed in a final effort against the cold, merciless, and finally sealed doors. The clouds on the horizon again burst into flames as a massive fiery meteor ripped the sky apart before plunging into the ocean, resulting in tidal waves of incredible proportion. The steam-filled atmosphere burned with instantly vaporized water. Within hours, as condensation rose, the rain fell as though to soothe and replenish the preceding loss and devastation. Large and small, the meteors kept descending. Death reeked in the air as humans, animals, and vegetation perished. The sky had become dark from airborne dust particles, vapors, and gases, spreading its death-wish tentacles, and slowly, but inevitably, annihilating all. Some found refuge in natural cave formations, but with little or no supplies. It remained only a question of time before they perished. The wildlife had no escape. Birds fell from the sky, as if in fright. Some animals shared the shelter with humans in the caves, to be later devoured by their cohabitants. For years, the meteors continued to strike not only Earth, but also all the planets in our solar system. Even the sun was not excused and suffered. The entire solar system sat like ducks in a shooting gallery. The surface of the Earth was devastated. 90% of life had perished. Only the Eaters of Carrion survived this gauntlet of destruction. Forests burned. Rivers altered courses or disappeared altogether. The concurrent volcanic eruptions destroyed what was left, and the Earth no longer resembled its former self. Many hundreds of years passed by, with over 99% of surface life long perished. Beneath the crust, the subterranean populations, although living in constant fear of the continual thud of meteors above them, remained relatively safe. Despite some caverns closer to the surface being destroyed by meteors or engulfed by falling debris, the system appeared to be enduring, even surpassing many expectations. Ample supplies of mining equipment and machinery allowed for the extension of the underground system and a means of escape when tunnels collapsed or entrances were buried by tons of rock and debris. This had been well planned for in advance. New generations were born over the centuries, with noticeable changes occurring in the human physique. Pale-skinned humans were born, with eyes larger and oversized pupils. The new environment was dictating evolution. The darkened sky was partnered with searing surface temperatures. An unusual glow emanated from every object in the pervading gloom. Yet the meteors continued their relentless onslaught. As the skies grew darker still, insuperable tons of water vapor and gases amassed, shrouding the entire planet, preceding the rains. Rains like never seen before, without any apparent end, descended onto the surface. Storms raged across the entire planet, resculpturing the burned surface with newly formed rivers, lakes, plateaus, and valleys. The waters wound new routes to the oceans, washing the Earth's surface clean, before changing direction again, as even more meteors struck. The rain, filled with toxic gases from the atmosphere, was not drinkable. In fact, to do so would be fatal. 3 kilometers below the surface, it had been a pleasant phosphorescent Sunday afternoon in the common room on level 5, until a growing pool of water was observed seeping through minute cracks in the solid rock floor. Already, it seemed to be increasing in its rate of emergence, clear and fresh, like that in tales of long-forgotten mountain streams, and drinkable. This was the only appreciable fact regarding the appearance of this water. Unaware of the raging storms and flooding on the surface, the subterranean population had no expectations. They were unsuspecting of the billions of liters of water now forcing its way down through the cracks and cavities, relentlessly penetrating towards their domain. Unaware of the destruction of the primary entrances to the system, destroyed and buried under millions of tons of rock, lava, and debris. During the next 12 hours, many more pools of water formed. It was oozing through the walls of several tunnels and caverns, building up at a fearful rate, with nowhere for it to be pumped, other than the disused areas of the tunnel network. Relentlessly, the water penetrated, until entire sections of the lowest levels were submerged. Still, the water rose, flooding machinery and equipment, ruining supplies. The water continued to penetrate their domain. Calculations revealed that the surface, high above them, must be under several meters of water. Breaching the surface would cause their entire system to flood. Even the air that they had so carefully preserved escaped, as the increased water volume pressured it out. In desperation, bulkhead walls were constructed in an attempt to contain the rising water. As more of the population scrambled to the upper levels of the system, oxygen levels and supplies were rapidly exhausted as they were destroyed, submerged in water. Already overcrowded and panicked, with still many thousands of people trapped in the lower levels of the system, a vote was taken and agreed upon to totally seal off all the entrances and exits to the lowest 3 of the 9 levels. This would be sealing the fate of all those below them, but there was no other way if any were to survive. It was possible for those in the upper levels to release the water down to lower levels, which were by far the largest in area. As this was done, the frantic screams of those beneath them were drowned out by the noise of the gushing water. Thousands drowned and were left to float in cold, dark wetness. Three kilometers below the surface, the lowest levels were left over 30 meters plus, underwater. Enormous quantities of supplies, machinery, and equipment laid inaccessible and rendered useless beneath the water. Within a mere 3 weeks, only a water-filled silence existed on the lower levels, yet still the waters rose, until there were only 6 levels remaining. The remaining levels were very small in comparison to the now destroyed levels 7, 8, and 9. The pounding meteors still shattering the surface above them, once seen as distant and not so threatening, now posed an imminent and lethal danger. The remaining subterranean population was left with a fateful choice. Either they would have to break through to the surface or risk drowning in the ever-rising waters, remaining forever entombed. 3 kilometers below ground level, all knowledge, tools, equipment would be totally lost forever. An entire civilization would have vanished off the face of the earth. The fear of breaking through to the surface, only to discover it still was flooded, was paramount. Such a situation would be catastrophic. Water would plunge down and quickly flood their remaining caverns, drowning everyone. There was no choice. Only to do it, and maybe die, or not to do it, and definitely die. The mining crews worked non-stop, excavating their way to the surface. It would take at least a couple of weeks to do this, and the rate of the rising water indicated the loss of levels 3, 4, 5, and 6 before the surface could be reached. further levels would need to be sealed off, not only in an attempt to arrest the rising waters, but mainly to stop those people below, trying to push their way up to the already overcrowded upper levels. The air had become dangerously stale. Approximately 35,000 people remained on the lowest levels. A decision to slaughter entire families, women, children, babies at the breast, all would perish. To, maybe, allow the few at the top to survive. Their judgment day came. A fateful decision to seal off the doors. Panic, rioting, and violence erupted amongst the doomed that were destined to drown in those dark, bottomless caverns. A battle, almost like a mini-war, arose in the areas where explosives were being laid to seal off the lower levels. The horror of this fighting brought about a temporary impasse, when again it was questioned whether or not to blow the tunnels. As the arguing and indecision continued, and as though to provide them with a conclusive answer, a large meteor exploded into the earth, about 10 kilometers away. The tremendous shockwaves rumbled throughout the entire system, throwing people off balance. The solid rock walls around them screamed and cracked as the walls and floor buckled and twisted out of shape. That was it. The panic increased tenfold. There was no time for delay of any kind. While people from the lower levels were still scrambling over the barricades, screaming and begging for their lives, the explosives were detonated. Over 500 people were instantly killed and buried. Those further below, yet still alive, were walled off. Their fate was sealed, along with their bodies and souls. A spine-tingling, yet silent panic pervaded the remaining 600 survivors in levels 1 and 2, as further cracks and more cracks appeared. A silent, panicked mob surged towards the digging tools. The exit tunnel was still over 100 meters away, and time was running out. Above them, and again not far away, another meteor struck the earth, causing cave-ins in the tunnels and caverns. Several groups were cut off from the main, trapped by falling rocks. Level 2 was rapidly filling with water, leaving others trapped in caverns, air-locked, cut off from the main group. In some caverns, many were gathered, huddled together in pitch-black darkness, an abyss of silence, or hovered around a small lamp of phosphorescent fungi. Children cried in their mother's arms, all aware that their time had come. As the oxygen depleted, they would all die and remain in an underground tomb forever. Time passed. How much? One could not tell. Level 2 was now submerged and bottlenecked with floating bodies. Level 1 was following suit at a frightening pace. Although the sections on Level 1 were all 1 kilometer below the surface, the inclined tunnel leading upwards to where the excavations were underway to exit the system was jammed. People queued en masse, ready to pour out when the surface had been reached, prepared to face exploding meteors above, but not the dark watery graves awaiting them below. They now realized that suddenly the bowels of the earth that had been their home for many generations had become an ugly, violent monster, surging up to devour them. Tens of thousands had already perished, afloat in their watery graves 3 kilometers below. Gone, all those people, the machinery, the knowledge. Although some supplies had been salvaged, it was minuscule in comparison to that which had originally been stored in the complete system. The heat buildup in level 1 and the inclined tunnel, along with the reduced oxygen levels, began to take its toll. In the very uppermost areas where carbon dioxide gravitated, the situation was grave. People fainted, hallucinated, and generally added to the overall atmosphere of panic. Suffocation. Exhausted miners rotated shifts to allow for maximum energy in the endeavor to escape. A great cracking noise and a shuddering deep below accelerated their fear. The picks went in deeper. At the bottom of the inclined tunnel, all but level 1 people stood in 1 meter of water, hugging each other, whilst gravitating towards the tunnel of escape. Soon, many of them would suffer a similar fate to those in the levels below. Perhaps they would all perish in those horrible caves. Still, those that were able continued to dig. No eyes witnessed the strange movement of rocks that lay strewn against the side of a small valley, nor was seen the bloodied, desperate arm that emerged, groping and pushing more rocks away. There were no ears to hear the eruption of elated screams emanating from the now enlarged hole. Once big enough, the first man crawled out of the cave. His name was Adam. Several others followed, scrambling for freedom, for life. Before them, around them, and to the horizon, lay a scene of total devastation. No trees or shrubs, but wild rivers raging and rain beating. The humidity, steam, and many gaseous vapors thickened the already overheated atmosphere. As the cave opening expanded, more survivors emerged. Soon they were all on the surface, all 231 of them. Everyone else had perished below. 130 men, 80 women, and 21 children. Distant meteor strikes over the horizon were heard and felt. Absolutely overwhelmed and in an unfamiliar world. A world of total destruction and devastation. The last people considered their options for continued survival. The water level in the cave system eventually stopped rising at a depth of 65 meters below the surface, but it was congested with many bodies and floating debris. Their only shelter was a dark and bottomless pit of death. Once the bodies were removed, the water-filled shaft resembled a freshwater pool within a cave. Soon this water would become fit for drinking. The survivors undertook to expand the cave system above the water level to make it more habitable. Search parties were established to venture out and search for berries, roots, or anything edible. Lizards, ants, several small animals and fish were occasionally seen, and those caught were eaten. The occasional small flock of birds was observed with wonder. As the years passed, the meteor strikes diminished. Regrowth occurred. Surviving species multiplied. as did the cave people. Their exploration and hunting expeditions expanded, and occasionally naturally formed small caves were discovered. Splinter groups began to use these caves as permanent dwellings, rather than returning to the original base cave. Many thousands of years passed, and the surface became abundant with vegetation and wildlife. They had survived. As generation succeeded generation, the legend was passed down of their ancestors who were born from a hole in the ground, and of lost spirits deep within the bowels of the earth. They were told that, after death, they also would journey to the underworld, the birthplace of their ancestors. Israel, the year 2050 AD. Several kilometers outside Jerusalem, an oil rig was attempting to drill for core samples from deep below the surface. Difficulty was being experienced with the drilling teeth of the auger, which continued to wear down and become smooth on impenetrable rock encountered approximately 3 kilometers below the surface. On retrieval, the residue on the drilling head was found to be an unidentifiable, solid metal rock. Several different heads were engaged, but all failed. A parallel shaft was bored, just 3 meters from the original. At 3 kilometers, the drill head penetrated a large cavity and continued to bore through the accumulation of debris and equipment on the floor of level 2. The retrieved core sample resulted in a shocked silence. A contrivance of immense secrecy evolved as the information extended to the classified levels of national security. With few exceptions, the crew of the oil rig was totally replaced with government agents, who proceeded with a vertical mining operation in order to cut a manhole shaft into the cavity 3 kilometers below. A video camera lowered down the core sample shaft, beamed back the unbelievable. An air pocket was revealed, within which hundreds of people had met their fate in the sealing off of the levels, many thousands of years before. Their mummified remains, their possessions, plus an array of machinery, the likes of which had never been seen before, lay as it had on that fateful day. Government agents eventually penetrated further cavities, amassing copious information and equipment. Still, the questions remained. Who were these people? Where had they come from? What had befallen them? It was another 18 months of excavation and drilling, all the while discovering further areas of the subterranean system before the Great Library, 4.5 kilometers below the surface, was located. Records were deciphered in order to comprehend the communication system, revealing an unbelievable knowledge of science and technology, which terrified those translating the content. The astronomy section of these records revealed studies and calculations relating to our solar system's vast intergalactic cycle and the 13,000 years leading to the Great Passing. Calculations have led to the realization that there is very little time remaining before, once again, the Earth passes through the rings of Alcyone and the meteor storms of the photon belt. There may only be another 50 years. Enormous works were begun, excavating deep into the Earth, constructing cavernous holes and tunnels, which would become known as the system, in which people could find shelter during the ensuing period of meteor strikes, assailing Earth.